Okay, welcome everyone to another terrific YANA program. During the day, we're doing one on technology for nonprofits. Hopefully this will be useful to many of you, and hopefully this will be an opportunity for you to share any of your best practices and lessons learned. We're certainly looking to create an entire list of tools, resources, not necessarily to endorse any of them, but just to share kind of what we've learned along the way. So let's get started right away. We're going to start right from scratch. Oops, see, I'm so fancy, I can't figure out how to do this. So we're going to start let me just back up. We're going to divide this into a couple things. I'm going to talk about if you are starting a website from the very beginning and you need to figure out what to do. You don't have an IT staff, or you've got an idea and you want to kind of start playing around. This is definitely from lessons learned. I did it myself with my other website, and we've had to learn a lot of stuff for YANA. So I'm happy to pass along any information that I've figured out and save you guys some trouble next time you are looking to add on a piece of technology. So I'll start from the sort of very beginning part. Rachel Tibbetts will talk about more established organizations that are looking to shift to the cloud or to create more sophisticated databases, rebranding, things like that. Then we'll have time for Q&A, but please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat function. Oh, I forgot I made some polls. So I'm going to start a quick poll so we just get a sense of where everybody is. Are you just starting out with your technology in your organization, or are you established? So we'll just give that a few seconds. It's like we're relatively split. I see a couple of people, maybe 7 people haven't answered yet. If you can take some time to answer the poll that just popped up. A couple more. Well, this is good. All right, so we've got a pretty good split between those who are starting out and those who have been around for a while. I'm just going to end the polling. I can share the results. If you guys can see the share results, it's just about, for those of us who are on here, a couple more people who are established than aren't. And then I want to do one more poll just to find out what kind of technology interests people have. As we go through these, we'll try to answer questions if we've missed something. And then if we can, we'll adjust to spending a little more time on one topic or another, or we'll share some time to answer questions if we can. So there should be another poll. What kind of technology issues are you most interested in? Databases, document management systems, accounting, bookkeeping, website. We put a bunch in there. Yeah, I think you can click as many as you like. And let's see where people are. If you're just joining us, hopefully there is a poll that's popped up just to try to get a sense of what people's technology interests are. I think I see a lot on marketing, email, things like that, fundraising, donor management. Got a couple more seconds. Come on, those of you who haven't answered, give us a couple of links. It'll help us. The more data we get in here, the better. Looks like the biggest ones, fundraising, donor management, databases. That's good. Marketing, email. Okay, good. I think we're going to hit all of those. I see a few more coming in. If you've got a couple of seconds, want to answer pick a couple of options that you're interested in, and we can share that. All right, I think that's good. I'm going to end the poll, and then I'll just show you guys what it looks like. Aha, looks like database is most interesting. All right, Rachel Tibbetts is going to have a lot to do there, and we'll cover some of the other ones as well as marketing, online, things like that. We'll try to cover all those. And the last one I want to share with you guys, one last poll is, are you on your own or are you not? Who handles your organization's technology? Do you do it yourself? Do you have someone internally like a staff member, or do you hire someone or borrow someone, your kid, a consultant, when you can? Oh, good. Everybody's doing this the same way I am. Oh, yep, a little more. The more answers you can provide, we can get a better sense. Okay, so good. This is going to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty. So even if you don't do it yourself, you'll have a pretty good idea if you're hiring someone or you're supervising someone of what some of the capabilities are that are out there and what it'd be looking for and to know what's possible. All right, let's just end this now. I don't want to spend too much time on polls, but looks like we've got a lot of folks on the call who are doing their own organization's technology, and we can raise our hands if we're doing that. That's me too. All right, so let's get into this. So if you're starting from scratch, one of the things you're going to need is, obviously, if you haven't done this yet, and we've been working with a lot of students who are starting organizations, great idea, but if you haven't actually reserved the name, you could be in trouble down the road when you actually want to create a website or file as an organization in a particular state. So highly recommend coming up with something, reserve it on some kind of a host. That could be, I just picked a few here, Bluehost, there are a few other places, there's GoDaddy, we've got a list of those, and there are a bunch of other ones, and some people like some others than others. They're not that expensive, but it is something you want to build into your budget because it does cost some money to pay for a license every year to have your website hosted. So you do want to reserve the domain, reserve the name, make sure you've got some kind of a brand at some point. You may be super at this. You can also hire people to do it. We'll get into a little bit of hiring consultings. Upwork is a good place to find freelance consultants, and I've added some other ones like Fiverr. If you're really talented yourself, there are a few, there are places where you can just generate one for free, or you can, you know, design it with a little bit of a graphic system. So there's lots of different ways to do it. Before you pay a huge amount of money to somebody, you know, check our resources list when we get there, and because there are some low cost or free ways to do it. And if not, going to hire a freelance consultant might be a really effective and low cost way to do it. Okay, some of the other basics. If you're ready to build a website, or if you're thinking about kind of switching a website, maybe you haven't quite done this yet, I did a lot of research. I had the slightest idea how to do this and what was even involved. I went to something called AWWW Awards. It's a great website. It's this group that has awards for the best websites that are on the internet. And I went and looked at years of past winners and tried to get a sense of what I liked. And I was looking for something for my website, seethegaps.org, because I was really looking for a feature that had a user interface, some kind of an interesting interactive user interface. You might want something that's a nonprofit, pretty simple. There are lots of places out there, and there are websites who do nothing but rank and provide awards for nonprofits. So do some research first, get some inspiration. You've already probably hosted it, and then, you know, other than hosting, that's something called, that's the GoDaddy or DreamHost or Bluehost or something like that. You then have to figure out where and how you're going to actually build the website. That's a different thing, which was new to me. And that is where you may have heard things like Squarespace, Weebly, WordPress, Wix. These are actually where you go to build your website, and there are pages, and it's where you do all your layout. A lot of these have themes, templates. There's no reason, unless you've got a ton of money and you want to hire a professional consultant, there are plenty out there that do this, can do from soup to nuts. This is what I did from building from the ground up, and you can do pull a lot of these pieces together yourself. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody in the waiting room. Okay. So you've sort of picked a website host, you've got a name, maybe you've even got a logo, and you're like, I don't know, if you're like me, you get overwhelmed with a number of options and themes. So just to bring you further down that rabbit hole, there are websites that can help you pick color palettes. Believe it or not, you don't have to do this on your own. You can pick them, and that's another rabbit hole you can get lost down if you want to spend an afternoon doing research on what kind of colors relay what kinds of emotions, what kind of nonprofits. There are tons of them out there, and we have some in our list that I will share with you. You can also do things like pick different fonts, to pick different complete like alphabets and sets of icons. You don't have to use what comes with Google or Microsoft Word. If you want, you can really play around, make something very unique and make it yours, and have a lot of fun with it, or pay some intern to have fun with it. So there's a lot of flexibility. And again, some of these are free, some of them are very low cost. If you're eventually gonna have someone help you with the website, you wanna make sure you've got things that are all compatible with whatever theme you're using, for example, WordPress or Weebly or something. And a lot of these times, if you're downloading a packet of icons or a theme or a template, they'll tell you what version or what kind of website builder it's compatible with. So you won't get totally lost, but just so you know that it's out there. You also probably going to want images, and unless you're a professional photographer or you have tons of images or you want to go out and take really high quality images, you might want to incorporate some. This is just to get yourself started or even as you go along. If you haven't heard of Unsplash, that is a free, royalty-free website for photos. There's also, I'm forgetting, not FormStack, but there are other ones you can pay. We've got a list of those. There are plenty out there you can pay for either for a package or to download individual images. This is pretty cool. I have to say, my son is a sort of amateur photographer and he got an Unsplash award. So it's, I think that there's a whole other sector out there of artists who are uploading their photos, and you might see them as the sort of standard templates for people talking at a meeting. So that's just another place where you can pick some free website photos. And I think the most is they ask you to give attribute to the artist. There are also, if you really want to start adding some graphics, I know this is a little hard to see, Esri data. Again, I'll have these listed. There are some really, really cool data visualization tools out there for topography, demographics, topographics, all sorts of things. Esri data is I think the most powerful one. I learned about this in a commercial watching the Super Bowl maybe a year or two. I'd never heard of this thing, and I did a deep dive into it, and now I know other people use it if you're into archaeology or environmental mapping and things like that. But they have a lot of free tools, as do websites like the Census Bureau. A lot of free public database systems have visualization aspects to it, so you can really do some funky things and not just to have text on your website. And if you really want to get people engaged in what you do, depending what your mission is and how you want to relay that. Infogram is another one. A lot of these templates and websites you have might have some features. If you want to do like a bar graph, like if you're familiar with spreadsheets or slides, Google Slides or something where you might have, you've got a couple of columns of data and then you can quickly put that easily into a pie chart. That's fine. But if you want something to be embedded into your website, you don't want to have something that's, it's a little bit harder to have a living link to like a Google Drive or something. Infogram is one of those systems where it's just like kind of the spreadsheets and the data is saved in the cloud, and you can do all sorts of funky planning with that, but then you can have it embedded in your data in your website pages, and that'll be live. So anytime you go in and update the data, it'll automatically update on your screen. And again, these are kind of like rudimentary level. You can pay more. Sometimes if the free version has the watermark on it, you might want to go a little higher. If you want more flexibility, each of these have several tiers to do it. Someone just asked a question. Let me just say what you said. Which of the formatting resources you provide information about accessible designs? Oh, that is a great question. I haven't gotten into much as that. I've been researching. There are what would otherwise be known, I think, and Rachel Tibbetts can correct me if I'm wrong. You can get things like add-ons or plugins to your website that can kind of scrape your whole website formatting to make it accessible depending on what the parameters are that you request. So I don't believe that you have to go get a special kind of these, that kind of accessibility aspect is built into a part of your whole website, no matter what you have on it. There may be a few that aren't as compatible, and if anybody has familiarity with that, please let us know. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. What I'm using right now, this is the first time I've used Prezi, which is basically a fancy animated version of slides. You can zoom in, zoom out. I learned about it maybe 10 years ago when I went back to grad school, and there are all these young folks using this. Again, you can get lost down the rabbit hole in this one. There are tons of templates. And right now, the feature I'm using is something called Prezi Video, which comes from Prezi Presentation, and then it's set up so while I'm broadcasting, I can show you my slides at the same time. So there's some really funky features. I happen to have a professional, not very expensive account that I use for something else, and I'm just trying this out now. So if you guys like it and you can see it, I have links to it, but again, sometimes you just play around. And again, this is just using a template Rachel Tibbetts and I use. There are a million things you could do with it, but it certainly makes, you don't have to have a production company at home, is basically what I'm saying. You also can do your own videos. If you want to do like an explainer video, maybe it's a fundraising video, those sort of 30-second to 2-minute long things. I did my own. I actually hired somebody through Upwork in India, but I did a lot of the beginning stuff myself. You can do that. You can do those things that look like they're hand-drawn. You've seen on the YouTube and stuff. You can do that. There are all these different resources out there. So you can make your mission, your stories come to life without too much need to have a very high level of technology understanding. If you really want to go for it, you can actually add music. All that cheery, clinkly xylophone music you hear in the backgrounds of ads, that stuff is out there on the internet, and there are royalty-free sites where you can do it. A lot of the websites like Canva and some of the video production or video editing software will have sort of standard music background you can use, or you can go and pick what you want. It's actually kind of cool. You can also create your own, save it. If you're into music, there's a way to do that. All right. So don't think like you're stuck with something. You can be if you want, but if you want to, edit or play around with any of the features, you're welcome to. And who knew? I'm not in production. You can actually go and pay for voiceovers. There are freelance voiceover artists out there. I found, this is just one of them. I found Voice Bunny. Same thing. And you can, if you write out a script to a little video, which if you watch mine on seethegaps.org, that's what I did. I tried recording it myself. I did it a million times and I decided the quality wasn't so good. So I spent a little money. I wrote the script myself. I sent it to this website. I picked the voiceover I wanted. When I had done the video, the slides portion with the video company, I had that sent to the voiceover person. She recorded it. I had the slightest idea who she was. We edited it up, I'm done. So it's basically you're trying to de-aggregate all the pieces that might come into a professional production company. And just to let you know, don't be overwhelmed or upset if you feel like you can't afford these things, because the tools are out there. You just have to dig a little bit. And this, at least you can go to our website now and our resources to start with. You can have fun with it, and maybe you try it for your next gala or your next video event, something like that. All right, so you've got your website up and running. It looks fabulous. You're getting hits. It looks really cool. You're happy with the video. Now you want to be able to share it, and you want to be able to build your network and build your donor base. So obviously you're going to want an email. There are a lot of different systems. Some of your web hosting sites like Bluehost, GoDaddy, DreamHost will have webmail features. They're a little clunky. A lot of these you can copy, have the links to the email inbox copied over to your Gmail, or whatever you're using. That's just for email. If you want to actually have like a marketing system that were like these come from a database when you can actually do newsletters and things like that, you're going to want to use something like Constant Contact or MailChimp. And these are really just marketing email systems. You can collect, there's a little bit of playing around you can do. You can embed the sign up form. You can have a little bit of customization with that. You can collect some information. You can add people to lists and links. That's exactly what YANA does. When you receive our newsletters or any of our communications, that's coming out of Constant Contact. That's just one piece, we ended up using. It's pretty low cost. I inherited it, so I can't say I've had a chance to do it. I use MailChimp for my other website. There are a few out there and people can chime in which ones they like or not, but there's no reason to go out there and be like, I have the slightest idea how to do this. Go to Constant Contact or MailChimp, and there's lots of ways to do that. And we'll talk about later, Rachel will talk about later, is what happens when you start, after you've put all these pieces together and you've created something and you want to start pulling things together because you've kind of like stuck it all together with some tape. And it's going to be a little more complicated if you're not starting from one massive overhaul. You might want some forms. You might want to do collect information on people. You might want to do surveys, a whole bunch of other things. You can do something as simple as Google Forms, which is that little purple image I did in the back. That's fine, but remember that information is going to stay in your Google Drive unless you put it someplace. There are some other sophisticated ones, form builders out there. FormStack is one of them that work with some of the databases, and a few others out there. You also probably, if you're a nonprofit, if you're already certified by the IRS as a 501c3 or similar, you're going to want to start getting some donations, hopefully, so you can pay for these things after you've done your budget. PayPal is one way. And remember, most of these, if you do get paid subscription services to any of these platforms I've talked about, if you are a 501c3, make sure you investigate a nonprofit discount, because you don't have to pay the full price. Most of these places will either give you a free license or a discounted license, depending what it is. So just keep that in mind before you think you have to go spend $200 for something. You may get it for free. It just takes a little bit more time, because you normally have to supply your IRS letter, you may have to supply a little more information, but most of these places are willing to have resources. PayPal, that's one way you can accept payment. These are for, like, this is really for nonprofits. Oops, see, I'm gonna start adding all the different ones that are out there. Fundly, Pledge, QGive. These are fundraising and money intake platforms. There are a bunch out there. We've got a list. Network for Good is one that we use. It's a donor advised fund itself. So whereas through PayPal or QGive or some of these other ones, every time you receive a donation, it will hopefully, I can't remember where they attach the fee, will come right to your linked bank account. For something like Network for Good, it's going to operate like a regular donor advised fund, which means your donors give to Network for Good. They get the tax receipt from Network for Good. You get the donation from Network for Good, which will it's just a matter when you go on the back end to thank donors and handle your accounting and taxes and things like that. That's just a slight difference. So we can, do another program on fundraising, but just want to let you know what the kind of the differences are that are out there, what's available. You're also going to want to do events. I hope most people now are using Zoom and they have a pretty simple event registration page. But Eventbrite was when we were back. You can do that for live ones. You can do it for, remote. It's just a ticket collection kind of site. You can customize, you can collect lots of data. You can make it look like your brand. That's a pretty common one. There are also other ways. There are other like ticket, event management software and apps that are out there, just so you know. You're also going to want to, I would highly recommend, don't keep your first round of your first pieces of information on a spreadsheet on your desktop, because if something happens to you or your computer, no one's ever going to be able to get it. If you're a nonprofit, that information doesn't really belong to you. It belongs to the organization and belongs to the public. So you're going to want to put it someplace in the cloud. So God forbid something happens to you, the organization will live and someone will be able to find your information. So something like Google Workspace is pretty simple. Well, it's more so I just migrated all of YANA. Again, we had started with, website, webmail here and constant contact there, and everybody had different emails and it was getting to be kind of a mess. And so one thing I did is I had to hire a consultant through Upwork and pay, $20 an hour, $30 an hour for about 10 hours to help me migrate all of our YANA stuff over to Google Workspace. So now I can manage all the emails, or at least if I'm not there, some central person will be able to do that. That took a little bit. I would have done it right off the bat if I had known. And then the biggest one we're going to talk about for databases. Well, there's another one Rachel will talk about, Blackbaud and Razor's Edge is through there. And the biggest one is Salesforce. Maybe you've heard of Salesforce. That is the largest and probably most popular database management system. And I think that's all I have before I go to Rachel. Let me just see if there are any questions. We will share this. I have a resource. We'll share it at the end. Oh, going slower. Yep, that's me. Sorry, apologize. My Philadelphia and New York upbringing, I do talk quickly. You'll be able to watch this later. And you can ask us questions, and a lot of this will be in our resources. You'll be able to access this and ask us questions later on. All right, Rachel Tibbetts, do you want to go ahead and I'll pin you and I will go on mute.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
You may have to let me know when to go. Sorry, you tell me when to. Oh, this is not going to work because it doesn't work on your screen. Okay, that's fine. You know what? We're going to, I'm going to pin me.
That's fine. Everyone can look at you still while I talk. That's fine.
You talk and I will do this. Yeah. Okay. See, I just learned something. This is a fabulous feature, except it only works on the person's computer. All right. That's one of the problems with some of these virtual camera systems. I just want to make sure I get you, Rachel. We have 30 people on here. All right, Rachel, go ahead. Do you want to let me know when to go to the next slide?
Okay, so before beginning, I just want to say a couple of sort of general tips that I've learned also, like Rachel, sort of the hard way. And it really applies to whether you're starting from scratch or you're an existing org. And Rachel touched on one of them, which is, no matter what, always ask for a nonprofit discount and be aware that if you're purchasing software or services, there are companies like TechSoup out there that offer really, really great nonprofit discounts. So just to underline that you can get it cheaper, I promise. And a lot of vendors will negotiate with you as well. where I think something to consider in doing everything is that there are a lot of laws out there that ignorance doesn't excuse, right? So there are data privacy laws, security, can spam laws, data retention laws, all of that kind of stuff. And it can differ from state to state, but there are federal laws as well. So just make sure that that you're aware of what's out there and what you might be doing. You can Google search most of it, but there may be times when, particularly if you're putting something like a privacy policy on your website, you may want to consult legal counsel and make sure that that you're not doing anything illegal. And then just a couple of other things when Rachel touched on this too, you've got all these different pieces of your website, you've got your database behind things, you've got your email system. It can get really unwieldy really fast to kind of manage all of those systems if you don't have something that connects them all together. And so there are a lot of options out there, a lot of connectors, or integration systems, but it's something just to kind of keep in mind as you approach any project. Okay, so I can start for me, Rachel.
All right.
So I think the biggest thing is, if you're an established company, you already have all of this. How do you know when you need to make a change? And I think there are, and this I'm talking specifically in this conversation about databases, your website, or your rebrand, but really it's with anything. It can be that you find out that what your funders are asking for, what your reporting needs are. Your database isn't able to either hold that information, or you can't get it out of the database in a way that makes sense. So your funders are, or your board of directors, or even your internal leadership maybe is asking for stuff that you can't give them. That's when it may be time to make a database change, for example. When you're thinking about your website, are the needs of the people that you're working with, your constituents, are they being met? And that can go to something like accessibility, right? That somebody mentioned earlier. Is your website functioning for you? Is it easy to use? Has it grown either too big or too small for its britches, and you need to really kind of scale down or scale up and make it more applicable to your needs? And and there are a lot of other things too. One of the things that happened with my organization was a couple of different times in a couple of different instances, the security and the support for whatever platform we were using was ending. And so that meant we either had to live on an unstable system that was also insecure, or we had to make a change. So there may be sort of choices, and there may be less choices. It may be something that's kind of forced on you. And sometimes too, things like some of the website platforms, for example, that Rachel was talking about earlier, are rather off the shelf kind of solutions, and you can get to a point where that doesn't work for you anymore, where you need more functionality, or you need more customization, and the plugins and the widgets just aren't doing it for you. And that may be a time where you need to think of something a little more sophisticated. When you're thinking about something like rebranding, that's a huge decision. It's a really, really big decision, and it will involve your board, and it can be, multiple years of work to really get that done. But it can be incredibly impactful too. My organization recently went through a rebrand, and it really was it was at the time we were 35 years old, and we were using language in the child welfare system. It's a child welfare support agency, and we were using language that just wasn't relevant anymore, and was actually causing trauma to the youth and families that we were serving. So that was one of the, again, a sort of outside force that helped us make the decision to do that big project. Okay, would you go to databases for me, please, Rachel? So let's say you've made the decision that yes, I need to switch my database. You know, there are, first of all, there are databases. There are a lot of different databases that you might be using. And again, Rachel touched on this a little bit. In our organization, we use a whole bunch of different HR related databases that have to speak to each other. We have what we call our program database, which really houses all of the information about youth and families that we serve. And then we have a volunteer management system, which is our volunteer program is small enough that that one can be really low tech. So that's more in the form of a spreadsheet. That's called low tech. And then there might be your donor database, right? Which well, most people are going to have some sort of donor database. And there's finance and accounting. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just an example of some of the things that you might have, that you might decide to change. And so kind of going back to my first point, when you're making the decision to change a database and you're trying to choose what to change to, you really need to think about what do you need to get out of your database that you aren't already getting. And so that can really inform the choices that you make. You'll need to make sure that your reporting capabilities are flexible enough to change with you and the changes that your organization will endure, and hopefully for the life of the website or the database. You need to think about who's managing your database. You know, it might have been that you could handle your Excel spreadsheet, but now if you've tapped into Salesforce, for example, is that something that you can handle internally? Do you need to get special training? Do you need to get a specialized staff member? You know, do you need to hire in order to support that? So just think about that. So and all of that will help inform how then you get data into your database. And so again, it might have been that, you know, just hand entering things or batch entering things in your database worked well for you before, but now you need to gather information from constituents. So you do need to use some of those forms. How do those forms get into your database? If you're using something like Google Forms, that dumps into a spreadsheet. How does that spreadsheet get into your database? And is it direct data entry? And again, does that have staffing implications? Or does your database have the ability to upload spreadsheets? And if so, what does that look like? And is there a connector that you need to have? There's also the option to, and this is something that we elected, is to have sort of the portal portion of our website be directly linked to our Salesforce database. So there's none of that sort of middle upload or input. It's just directly in there. So that's an option too. That's when you start getting a little more customized and a little more expensive when you build things out, unless you happen to be a coder, which I am not. You also need to consider how you control for clean data. Do you do that on the front end, you know, where you really put controls on what data goes into your database, or is it something that you're more interested in getting the data and you'll clean it up on the back end? But that's important for reporting purposes. And then the biggest thing when you're moving databases is to really think about the migration of your data and how that's going to happen. Do you need to migrate all of your data, or can you archive some of it? What's the migration mechanism? Who does that for you? Is it something you can do yourself? And then going back to what I touched on earlier, you also need to really consider privacy. Are you collecting personal identifying information from people or personal health information? If so, you need to be really careful about the security, whatever your database promises in terms of security. And just sort of as an example, Google Forms is easy to use. Everyone uses it. You know, you stick it out there. It's easy to build. You can tweak it to your liking pretty easily. But technically, Google owns that data. So you just need to be really careful that you know that, and that's a conscious decision that you make, and that it's not breaking any laws. I touched on some of these different databases that you might need. HR systems can include applicant tracking, which is something we had to switch to an actual applicant tracking system once we hit 50 people, because that's when we became where we had to start reporting on EEO and affirmative action. So as you grow, that's something to consider as well. Also, onboarding for us, as we grew from a 45-person organization to a 90-person organization in about a year and a half, and all of a sudden that becomes really hard to track if you don't have some sort of tracking system. And that may be the same as, or it may be totally different than your payroll and benefits systems. Let's see, your finance. We talked about that. One thing to consider also as you grow with HR systems, you have to manage a bunch of different things that you may not have had to do before. So it's not just payroll, but all of a sudden you may have medical benefits and W-2s and 401k and FSA and HSA and 1099s, and right now we're dealing with FFCRA and FMLA if you get big enough, and COBRA. All of those different pieces. And that's when it gets to the point where it's like, do I manage that in-house, or is this a good time to get a professional to manage it on my behalf? But you still have to have access to that. For donor database, it looks like there's a question there. What are some of the names of some good systems to manage HR, internal or external? That's a great question. And there are so many out there. When we got to the point where we needed to, well, let me start at the beginning. For our payroll and sort of employee and medical benefits and all of that, we use ADP, which is one of the biggest in the entire world. But there are I wouldn't even say hundreds. There are thousands out there, and some are better than others. Some are easier to use than others. It kind of just depends on what your needs are. But there are also, so that's sort of our relates real closely with our finance department and making sure people get paid, and then we're compliant on that end. As far as applicant tracking and sort of our onboarding, we use something called JobVite, but we're actually moving over to something called Applicant Pro. So again, a Google search, you can really find so many different options out there, and choosing is the hardest, right? Because you can sit down and salespeople will give you 100 different demos, and you really just kind of have to go into it with as clear as you can, understanding of what you're trying to get out of it, right? What are your needs? What purpose do you need this system to serve for you? And that will help narrow it down. And then sometimes it's just good salesmanship too, right? Who can draw you in. And
I add a lot of these in the resource document, and people, I saw someone said Gusto is a good one. Feel free to send us ones, and we'll include it on the ones if you have had a good experience with them.
Yeah.
Next slide.
For donor database, it gets to a point where it's not just about tracking who's giving you money. You might start need to be thinking about, is your payment processing system working for you? Does it integrate with either your other databases or finance as you might need it to? And that can include sending out invoices to sponsors, for example. And it can be related to your donate button on your website. Yeah, Rachel talked a little bit earlier about Eventbrite, and that works. What we actually use Eventbrite for the trainings that we provide to families, not for our fundraising events. Our fundraising events, we use a different platform called Mobile Cause, right? And so there are a whole bunch of different ways you can kind of pull that all together. But the reason we use something like one thing to consider is, if your fundraising event has an auction, for example, you might engage an auction company and they have their own database, and how does that feed into your donor database? And Rachel talked about MailChimp or Constant Contact, whatever your email system is. And this is where CAN-SPAM laws come in, right? You need to be really careful that you're making sure that you know who you can email legally. So there has to be some sort of connection there with your donor database as well. Crowdfunding is something that we've engaged in, and that's its own different platform that needs to integrate with everything. We also use our donor database for grants proposal tracking and for prospect tracking and for volunteer tracking. That's all I have to say about databases. Are there any other questions before I move to website?
Rachel, can you just say like how long your organization's been around, what its sort of annual revenue, you know, what the size of its financials, just, and I can tell you, YANA, we have like, you know, we've been around 10 years, we've had all these piecemeal, and only in this past year, we've been trying to consolidate things. We don't really have staff, we have a couple of contractors. So I don't have to do HR and any of those things yet. And then you're much more so and just so everyone watching can get a sense of where they might fall along the scale. And go ahead, Rachel. So you're much bigger. So I don't know if you're more people are at my end or you're in a much bigger organization like Rachel's.
In the middle, yeah. We're not huge, but we're definitely bigger than YANA. We were founded in 1983. We have about 90 employees in 3 different states. Our headquarters are in Colorado, but we also have offices in Utah and Nevada. Our annual revenue is just a shy of 9 million.
I can tell you, YANA, this is the first year we're filing full 990s, which don't get triggered, I think, until you have about $50,000 or $60,000 in revenue. So that gives you a sense of the difference in scale of budgets. But we all need to be using some of these same tools. We just don't use them quite as many and quite as sophisticated a way, but they do benefit everyone.
Yeah.
Next slide, Rachel.
Yes, please. All right, so website, if you decide to change website, that's also a really big decision because it's hard work. And I've done it twice at this organization, so I can say that with confidence. You may, you know, if rebrand is part of what you're doing, whether or not rebrand is part of what you're doing or part of the reason you're changing your website, you may need to get to a point where you engage both a designer and a developer, and they may or may not be the same organization. We split ours out, but then those 2 vendors had to work with each other pretty closely, and where that's important is that your designer and your developer are on the same page about form and function. So sometimes if you're contracting that out, your biggest role then is kind of playing the middleman and making sure that everyone's on the same page and that they're liaising appropriately. Rachel talked earlier about hosting your website. You can change your host really at any time, and there are differences in hosts. Most of them are pretty basic, but you do get to a point where you get enough website hits or transactions or hit a certain threshold where you may need to upgrade a little bit to handle that traffic. If you are changing your domain, that's Rachel talked about, you know, you have to purchase your own domain. That can be a big deal too. And there are implications there, but you just want to be really careful that it's something that that will last and really accurately reflects. I mean, you just have to be smart about what domain you choose because it can't always be exactly what your name is, right? Think about who's going to manage your website. So if it's if you're starting with something like WordPress that's more off the shelf, and it is super intuitive, and there's so many resources out in the world to sort of guide you through, you know, I need to add a page, I need to do this plugin, how do I do that? That's all out there. If you're using a more customized or sophisticated system, then there will be pieces that you're able to do internally, and there will be pieces that you always have to get a consultant to help you with. So you need to decide who's going to own that, right? The functionality piece of it versus the content, which content management's a little bit easier than some of the functionality. I saw a comment.
Question.
Yeah, I saw a comment of why can't your domain be exactly what your name is? Because somebody else already owns it. So when we changed our organization's name, we changed our name to Raise the Future. Well, raisethefuture.org was already owned by somebody else. It's what we wanted. We wanted raisethefuture.org. we couldn't have it. So we bought the domains raise-the-future.org. We bought raise-future.org. We bought a whole bunch of iterations of raisethefuture.org. Meantime, we actually went into negotiations with the person who owned raisethefuture.org because it wasn't actually a website. Somebody just was sitting on it, which people can do. They can buy it and park it. So we entered into negotiations. We're actually able to buy it from them. But that was a lot of work, and it involved lawyers to get there, right? So maybe I should say, maybe you can get exactly your name, but you have to work for it. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's just not possible.
Yeah, I would also recommend, like in the beginning, you'll see once you reserve or pay for a domain name, you're going to get, oh, do you want to also buy? And you're going to get offers from the hosting anyway, yep. And they'll give you all sorts of possible parameters of your name, including .net, .co, I mean, you name it. And that costs money. That's how they make money. But if somebody like Nike and all these places, I'm sure they own lots of different derivations or in litigation all the time. If you really care and you think you've got this fabulous name, which is unlikely that nobody else in the world has ever thought about it before. But if you can reserve something, it's worth it. It's not that expensive to do, and it's not that expensive to, it's like, $50 or $25 a year or something like that. But you do get into these other situations where you may have to get into negotiations to buy the one you really want. And so do it early and get as many as you can, because you don't want to get confused with anybody else. And the same thing's going to happen. Don't do that before you know, well, you could do it, but be careful that what the name of your actual corporation name. Don't build the website with the brand and everything before you've actually incorporated, because that name may not be available legally in whatever state where you want to incorporate. And then you're kind of back to, it's just a mess. So you want to kind of do things, reserve where you can, Delaware, New York, wherever you're filing, and then do the website too. And you've got a little more leeway on the website. It's the organizational name that's more important, because you have to have something that people can identify and find you if they ever need to sue you or get you correspondence, et cetera. It's a little more complicated, but you do want to keep that in mind. So that was the last thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, and you do have to file for a name change. Like you have to get that, it has to go through copyright and that kind of stuff, because you can't use somebody else's name. Okay, rebranding. One more thing on the website. I think, Rachel, you might have touched on this, but I just want to make sure that whether you're, no matter where you are in your website, you should have Google Analytics. It is just do it. Just add it to your website. It's so helpful. It helps inform your marketing. It helps inform your, if you need to rebrand at some point or need to move things over to a different website, that really helps inform how your traffic is going to flow. It's just really important. So do it. I didn't see that comment that came up, Rachel.
One question on the ADA requirements for websites.
Yep, that's a really great point, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, and it's because of lawsuits that are out there, right? People are suing, and there are even people who kind of troll websites to find ones that aren't ADA. It can be, Rachel's absolutely right. There are plugins for sort of the more off-the-shelf websites, and some of them are very, very easy to use. Some are more complex. I'll tell you, when we went through our rebrand, our designers came up with these beautiful colors, this great logo, but it didn't, when it came to ADA, it didn't have the right contrast. And so we actually had to make changes to the approved colors, the approved brand colors themselves, so that they would fit on the website. So that's absolutely something you really need to consider. And there are a lot of websites out there. Just do a Google search. There are a lot of websites out there that will actually scan your website and tell you where you are in sort of complying with ADA, and will make suggestions on, like, these are the things that are high priority violations versus things you might consider, right? All right, now I'm ready for rebranding. Rebranding is a big one. So if you've made the decision for whatever reasons, what are you changing to? What's your new logo look like? What are your new brand colors? What's your new font? All of that kind of stuff. is way, way, way beyond my expertise, and is absolutely something that we definitely paid someone to help us think through, especially because we were changing from something that had been established for 33 years by the time we changed. So there was a lot to consider. So I'm actually going to totally skip over step 1 and just talk about step 2, which is more relevant to technology anyways. So I've touched on some of the website things to consider, like, you know, buying the new domain name, and considering where you're going to host your website. One thing you do want to consider, though, is how long you're going to keep your old domain name. So you'll want some overlap, of course, and you'll want to redirect people from your old domain to the new domain, to the new website. You just have to decide how long you want to do that. Do you want to do it for 6 months? Do you want to do it for a year? Do you want to do it for 5 years? How soon do you want your old domain to be, you know, available out there in the market again? So we, for example, bought ours for 5 years, for the five-year transition, which felt right for our organization. And then website content can be, it depends on how big and complicated your website is, but part of a rebrand is going to be re-examining everything that's on there for the new language and the new messaging and the new tone of your rebrand. So that can be a huge, huge undertaking. And you can pay someone to do it, you can do it internally, but it's going to be a big project. You'll need to consider all the places you need to make the change of a rebrand. So, you know, it's things like your email address and that domain change as well. You need to consider, we're still finding this, you know, 7 months after our rebrand, all the places in the world where our old website address was embedded in somebody else's website and asking them to change it. You'll have to, of course, you know, refile with the Secretary of State. You'll need a new 501c3 letter from the IRS. Your payroll company has to change. One thing we also learned the hard way was we also moved offices. So we changed our name and moved off. We did a lot of change this past year. Change our name, move offices. The payroll company that we engaged didn't change our city in their system soon enough so that people were having taxes taken out in our old city versus the new city, and the tax rates were different. And so having to kind of clean that up at the end of the year. So that's really just a lesson to say that you'll find things months afterwards that slips through the cracks. It's hard to think of everything. And then, of course, with a rebrand, there's signage and business cards and email templates. You'll need to change all your MailChimp email templates, for example, your PowerPoint templates. If you have a branded Prezi, you'll need to change your branded Prezi, and all the other collateral. And of course, there's a huge external communication plan around the change. When we rebranded, we also changed our website and had some very special messaging for several months about, we're still the same company, we're still doing the same great things, we just have a new look. And then there's a lot of internal training, training people how to how to present the new messaging. You have to force people to practice, basically, and it does take practice. And then there's a component of change management as well, with all of this that I've talked about today. That's all I have to say.
Awesome, thank you. So I think we're just going to go to questions and answers. How can we help you? You guys can ask some questions. I just also want to let you know you can email me, Rachel@YaleNonprofitAlliance.org. If you've got specific questions, Rachel Tibbetts is also available. And we do have people in our network. If it's something beyond our knowledge base, we'd be happy to share it with you. One thing I wanted to remind folks is that there are a lot of Yale students who are very, very talented. If you are a nonprofit and you've got one of these kinds of projects, like maybe you're trying to build a new donor platform or something, there are students who, a lot of them can qualify for some kind of fellowship during the summer paid by the Yale Dean's office if they're working in a nonprofit. We also had students last summer, because of the COVID situation and people's summer projects were getting furloughed and just canceled, that people a lot of the students just wanted to do stuff. So we had a student who, for example, did the design of our new website, and I have a webmaster who's going to implement it now. So yes, we did record this. We'll have this available, and I'm going to show you where the resources document is going to be living online. And again, when we rebrand and get our new website out in the next couple of months, I'll try to have it a little bit more dynamic and have a way for people to add suggestions and things. But in the meantime, please feel free to email us. And I just lost my place. So anyway, think about hiring students. I'm happy to share information. If people want to know how you post a position with the Yale Career Services Office. You might also live near a local college or community college where you want to help support the students. When I started my other website, I was living here in Providence, Rhode Island. The Rhode Island School of Design is one of the top design schools in the country. And so I figured out how to post a job there, and I was able to work with a local student who on the side helped me design my first website. And yes, by the time I went to go have it, they're like, oh, I only design, and you give it to the implementer, the web builder. And he was, he had to keep asking questions about, what is this supposed to do? And they wouldn't, so you do end up having to kind of match things, or you can go ahead and, again, just hire a company that will have all those people in-house. But in the meantime, let me show you where we're going to keep these resources on our website. For now, it's under resources, the very top of the, I just added it today as a link that says technology resources for nonprofits. When you click on that, it's going to open a shared Google document. And you'll be able to scroll through it, and there should be a lot of links. I'm working on having someone make all the links live, but at least you'll be able to see them and just get a sense. So if you forget, or if you need to go back and if you want to just see what's out there or start from someplace, the whole point being is you're not alone. A lot of people have gone through this before. Ask some questions, get some help and resources before you go out there, because as Rachel said, there are thousands of folks who are willing to sell you their product. And even if you think you can manage this yourself and you go to someplace like Upwork or one of these, or Indeed or Idealist, where you might want to hire someone, they all look really qualified, and how the heck are you going to know which one to do? And that takes a lot of time. I mean, even for YANA, for doing our Salesforce consultants, which is, we realize is well beyond what I could handle. I need to pay someone who can get behind the scenes and figure out how to connect all of the platforms and pieces we have. That takes time, that takes expertise. And even trying to keep our budget manageable and just hiring, managing, I probably interviewed 12 to 15 different organizations and people until I found one that was going to work for our budget. But I can tell you, I would have been happy to work with any number of other ones. And the same thing with, we're trying to upgrade our data donor platform. There are some out there that I would just love to have, but well beyond our budget. There's no way I could justify paying that amount of money for a fancy donation platform when we're not even making that much yet, but someday. Gives me something to look forward to. So please feel free to ask questions, share. We can always do the resources for connecting with other nonprofits. I guess the question is, Raja, if you want to, what do you mean connecting with other nonprofits? You mean like in collaboration? Like, you can unmute yourself and ask the question if you like. We'll try to answer you.
Thank you. Yeah, so basically, I mean, in terms of creating events or marketing campaigns that share interests across the networks of the different nonprofits that might gain value from a partnership. Like if there's like a platform or like
you mean for some of these technologies, there are some, Rachel, you might be able to talk about it. I've heard that there are systems that there are like outsourced management systems that I don't remember the name, but I've heard of one or two that will do all this back office management stuff for you, the same way as if you are looking maybe not to become a 501c3. There's fiscal sponsorship arrangements out there where you get under the umbrella, and there are professional organizations that do that. There are also professional organizations that will handle some of these things that we're talking about. Rachel, do you know, if anybody knows any, or Rachel, go ahead, do you know them?
I don't. I know of them sort of vaguely, like you do. It's something that our CEO is actually a big proponent of. It beyond just sort of events management, something like that. Sharing resources for CFOs, for example, and some of those other resources that can be really costly to an organization. So how do you share that cost? And there are collaboratives out there. I just don't know any personally.
That's a great question, and I'll remember to make a note of this after the program, and when we go to use some of our interns, we will try to gather some more of that information and add it to our list. That's a really good question. We are going to do another program with one of our lawyers about mergers and collaborations and partnerships in the nonprofit industry. Exact kind of thing where there's a scarcity of resources, maybe mission alignment, and what that looks like for people that might already be established out there, and how some organizations are trying to come together, maybe not just an alliance, but actually kind of a merger or somebody coming underneath someone. You know, at the end of the day, nonprofit organizations are businesses. We happen to be mission driven and we're doing social impact work, but that doesn't, we might be exempt from paying state income tax and a few other things, but we still have reporting requirements. There are, we still have HR issues, privacy issues. You have to have websites, you have to have people, you have to have leases. I mean, everything else like an organization. The good news is people are generally willing to help if you can. We didn't even get into pro bono. Besides legal, there are some consulting groups out there. You might be able to get pro bono professional services like an accountant. There's also another, it's not called text. There's another organization where they donate their storage, like people pull extra amounts of data storage they have. There's a place where you can go get bandwidth or storage. And so there's some really funky ways that people have inserted themselves into the nonprofit space to try to provide these economies of scale rather than having everyone have to go out and buy their own licenses for all these products. Somebody had one last question, and I think we're about at the hour. Dojo, Mojo, email sweepstakes. Okay, beautiful. So we've got some resources. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, we even thought about when YANA was moving to its own Zoom license. We were using the Yale Alumni Associations, and we were thinking about, gee, if we've got a little bit of more of a budget, should we get that and then maybe try to parse it out and get another license at one of our, other shared interest group people. I don't know if folks have done that. It's a little more complicated. You obviously want to have some kind of agreement in place before you do that if you are two separate entities. And then, as Rachel said, you're going to need the lawyers involved or some kind of template involved to handle that. But I think we're going to try to do some more programs in the future about how to collaborate and share on some of these expensive products and resources that everybody needs, and maybe there's a better way to do it, at least in the social impact sector. Well, I want to say thank you. We've been going for an hour. I know I talked quickly at the beginning. It's all been recorded. Please go to our website and keep an eye on that document. Send us emails if you have any other ideas, either to add to that list, or if there's any other kind of programs or networking events you think would be really helpful, given the work that you do. So thank you, keep it up. You're not alone. Always come back to YANA if you ever need anything, even just to kind of bounce some ideas off. I call a lot of people when I was interviewing organizations, and I must have asked 10 people in an organization, like, what's your favorite, fundraising platform? And people will give you their answers. So it's a good, helpful group. So thanks for sharing your time with us. Have a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you at the next program.
Thank you.
Thanks.